Are there people, things, experiences that have inspired you along this journey?
Yeah, that's a long list, but I'll keep it relatively short. There are two that come to mind. If I were to share this podcast with any of my students that have taken my classes before, they know these names because I've hammered them into their head. The first is an architect named Liz Ogbu. She is a Black architectural designer, and she is actually where I learned the phrase citizen designer and expert citizen. This idea that there should be a relationship between the designer and the people that they're serving, and not just understanding the world from an outsider's perspective, but really getting involved with the people that you're talking to. As I've told my students last semester when I was teaching corporate identity, uh, get out in these streets. Get out in these streets and connect with people. You're designing for them, so you need to understand the world from their perspective. And Liz Ogbu has really shaped how I see that relationship between designer and end user, expert. So if I say expert, that's what I mean, the person who I'm designing for. And then the second is a disability is design activist named Josh Holstein. He is he is disabled, but he is also a designer. I believe that I don't actually remember the medical term off the top of my head, but does not have full mobility of his arms. So as you can imagine, design might be a little tough, but that's only from a normative perspective. It was his story and his explaining the world through his eyes and how the world is not designed for people like him that really made me tap into empathy as a design resource. Because we think about design and we think about the world around us from a normative perspective. But design really needs to approach solution building from a non normative perspective. That's how we come up with more innovative design. That's how we design a more equitable world. And I actually, what's funny, and this is digressing, and I apologize, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Go for it.
In my one of my classes, the design thinking class, and I changed the language at the last minute. The students were supposed to come up with design ideas for a new innovation. That was always the project, but the stipulation that they had this time is that they had to consider how someone who is physically disabled, how they might interact with the thing that they've created. And when I tell you, they came up with some amazing design intervention. And I always think if you design for those on the margin, that you make a more equitable design that anybody can use. No design is going to be made for everybody. I don't want to make like universal design as a thing, but there is a thing as more intentional and equitable design practice.
So you named a couple of folks. If somehow, some way they would come across this podcast and they could hear you, what are some things that you might say to them as you shared it and the way you described them and the impact that they had and continue to have on you? It just made me think about if folks are able to receive the messages from us, just to share that with them. So if there was an opportunity or some happenstance kind of way they came across this, what would you say?
The first thing well, if this were in person, I would ask for is a selfie because I, yeah, I need to bookmark that moment. But obviously the initial thing is thank you for shifting how I understand or how I think about design. Because I think that for me, I knew that I wanted to do something for social good using design. My thesis project for undergrad was about helping people cope with depression. And that to me was a project that was really satisfactory. Not that it was amazing, but I got to do something that felt like it had the potential for making change. But it wasn't until I ran across the work of Liz Ogbu, and it wasn't until I discovered Josh Holstein that I really understood that design has the potential to do more. It's not just about making pretty things. It is about making an impact, and citizen designers and design activists, or want to call ourselves, have an important role to play. And it was because of them that I was able to fully realize what role design has, and how we can use it as a tool to shift how we think about society and how people behave, and how they perceive the world and how they perceive other people in the world. We have this idea of empathy and design as a resource, but it's so shallow. It's about, well, a user loved this website. What makes it easy for a specific user to use this website or this tool that we're designing or this app? But that to me is only level one of the role that empathy plays. Because of them, that I discovered level 2 and 3. 2 being really thinking outside of yourself and thinking about the extreme users. And then level 3 is not just talking about them in theory, not just saying, what would a person do if they were like actually connecting with them and saying, hey, what do you think of this thing? This usable for you? How does this impact you? Or how does this shift your perspective on how you think society might perceive you as a person? Because those things can be, as someone who is plus size, like I understand what it's like to be in a world that doesn't really think about your existence and how anomalous it makes you feel. A world that's not designed for you. Obviously, it's not to the extreme as someone who is differently abled, but it is an experience that can be really isolating. And I don't want to perpetuate that. And I'm glad that they showed me the light on how to start thinking about making design more accessible, more intentional, and more empathetic.